Okay, so let's move on. We will start covering the next few concepts with some hands-on exercises. The first one is extensions. As you all know, the FHIR spec covers 80% of the use cases. The other 20% probably will end up being extensions in most implementation guides.
And I can use your outside voice.
Okay. I mean, one of the things about extensions is there is a lot of extensions already created by the working groups that own the resources. So unless you really need one, don't create one. You probably have to first go check on the resources, and there's an extension tab on each of the resources. Most of the extensions that you may need may already exist. Go ahead.
So there was a rumor that we weren't supposed to be using extensions anymore unless we got explicit approval. Is that just a rumor that someone started that has absolutely no bearing? All right, sweet, thanks.
So
That's absolutely an unfounded rumor. Extensions are an essential part of FHIR. And the only way that we keep resources simple is by letting people use extensions for all of the weird and wild stuff that exists. And so defining extensions is fine. The general guideline is before you define an extension, raise your requirement on chat.phir.org so people can say, oh, actually for that you should be using observation, or oh, actually that's what this core element is for. You just didn't recognize the name because we called it this because of whatever, and maybe we should make some changes to the documentation to make it more obvious, or actually there already is a standard extension for that. It's an implementation guide, whatever, that you never heard of and therefore didn't look at. Or, yeah, that sounds like something we should have. Please propose it and we'll add it as a standard extension. Or, yeah, that's really interesting. And if you need it, yeah, that's an extension. And no, please don't propose it as standard because there's no chance of us adding it to core. But start the discussion there. And that's sort of where we avoid creating 500 different extensions for the same thing and avoid creating extensions unnecessarily.
Thank you. And this is sort of building on that type of a question. We've also heard that when extending, it is preferred to, in a profile, to extend at the component level as opposed to at the base resource level. Is that true or not true?
not true. You should be able to add it anywhere. But Lloyd will give you a good answer.
So the tricky part with extensions is they will sometimes flow to systems that don't understand them. Those systems can, however, still store them. But as data gets edited, there's the chance that the editing that has happened has caused the extension to be invalid. So imagine a situation, you got a patient, they got a date of birth, there's an extension on the date of birth. You have no clue what that extension means. If somebody comes and changes the patient's address, you can update the patient resource. You can retain the date of birth extension because you know that changes to address can't possibly have impacted the extension inside date of birth. If there was an extension sitting on the patient root resource and you edit the address, the value of the extension on the root is now questionable. You don't know what it means. You kind of have to get rid of it. So generally speaking, it is better to nest extensions within the element that they pertain to because it's more likely that they will be retained across edits than if you put everything at the root. That's the most vulnerable place to, I changed something in the resource, therefore all of the root extensions that I don't recognize could have been invalidated and I have to throw them away. So that's where that guidance comes from. But it has to be, if you're going to nest it, it has to be because it actually pertains to the thing that you're nesting it inside.
But along those lines for blood pressure, so it has a systolic and a diastolic component, and some attribute of that blood pressure measurement applies to both of those. And what we were told was we had to, even though it applies at the top level, because it's the same thing for both, we had to nest it within each component, the identical extension, be it body exertional status or something, let's say, at rest, or at rest for 5 minutes. We wanted to put it at the resource level.
So in that particular situation, I would probably argue to use just observation.component. So I've got a component that says here's the systolic, here's a component that says the diastolic, and here's a component that says whether they were at rest or whatever. And you don't need extensions at all. And the components on an observation can qualify what was observed as well as describing what was found. So if you have qualifications on the observation, they're qualifying everything that you found. So that would be my answer there. But if you were to, I wouldn't, yeah. I mean, you could put an extension at the root level, but then it's more vulnerable to getting lost.
And that's what we did. We put it at the component level. But to me, when I went back and read what component was, they're components of the main code, which is the blood pressure. And the systolic and the diastolic measurements are components of a blood pressure. But the precondition of an exertional status is not a component in the same way. It felt wrong, but...
Yeah, I mean, components in observation have been used historically in version 2 and elsewhere for that same purpose.
I'm going to have to cut you off. We're running very long, so we need to keep to more general than very specific.
Okay. Learned something new. So the structure of an extension, this is from the specification itself. A simple extension typically has a URL which identifies the meaning of the extension, and then a value, a single value which is the value of the extension itself. And there is all kinds of information for you on the specification itself that you can read and understand. The best thing to do is actually look at a sample example and then go from there. So here is an extension, a simple extension example. This is on the questionnaire resource from the SDC project that we looked at. The extension is called optional display. So the idea is whether this particular question has to be displayed or not to be displayed. So what we have is a single URL, which is where the definition of this thing exists for computability, and then a value, which is a Boolean. So this is an example of a very simple extension that you can define. Structurally, we can open up and look at how it is defined, and we can create an extension and publish it and see how it looks. If people are up to it, we can go forward with an exercise. Do people want to take a shot at it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so in order to do that, I know, we can go create an XML and edit it, or you can copy this questionnaire SDC profile spreadsheet.xml, which is in the SDC project, into your sample IG project, and it should work. And you can go into the extension tab in Excel and look at the example that we just reviewed, the optional display, to understand how it is built up.
There's also a spreadsheet in the sample IG where you can go in, and it has an extension tab as well, and you can play around, see what you can do.
You can add it too. You can add an extension and then publish it, and then see what happens. It's in the resources folder. If you go to the resources folder, there is this file called questionnaire SDC profile spreadsheet.xml. And in that particular spreadsheet, there is an extensions tab. You want to copy the whole spreadsheet. Don't copy just the extensions tab. That won't work. The whole spreadsheet into your sample IG, and then run the build to make sure it works before you do any changes. Part of this activity, instead of using questionnaire item when you're building your own, you can use the resource usage context, because we already did a profile of usage context. If you want to include this extension eventually in a profile, you might want to mention the context as usage context, so that you can later on do another exercise where you actually you include this extension within that usage context. That's a good question for Lloyd, I think. I don't know the answer to that.
What's the question?
Can context type be anything but a resource?
Yes.
And the answer is
It can also be, now it's changed. You used to be able to do it by mapping. We don't allow that anymore. We used to distinguish data types and resources. We don't do that anymore. There is a third context, or there's a fourth context type, whose value eludes me at the moment. Let me go look.
okay. Continuing on extensions, complex extensions are extensions where you have multiple elements. Basically, all of the nested extensions. You could use one within another, and so on and so forth. So we'll review an example here. I think. Let me bring it up and show you how it would look. So a complex extension like called launch context is
Which is so complex it can't even be shown on the artifacts page.
I'm not able to see it here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, here, right here. So this is a launch context extension, which is to provide context to populating questionnaires and so on. So in this, if you see the actual extensions, you have the top level extension, which has a URL, which is the launch context, where you find the definition of the extension. And the value is prohibited because you're going to nest. That's an invariant. And then you have more extensions embedded within the extension. So you see there is an extension which carries the name with a with a URL value of name, a value that you can put in, the resource type with a URL of type and a value, and then a description, which is an optional thing. So this is, you can have complex extensions like this. Another example is in US core, you will see race and ethnicity. That is again a complex extension which has multiple data elements where you have different nested extensions within the top level extension. Lloyd, do you want to say something?
Yes, not specifically about this. If there's anybody who does not have the ability to run the IG publisher on their local environment, like Linda, and you'd like to be able to actually test your stuff, I just committed a new file to the sample IG folder that provides instructions for getting set up, which will let you use the continuous integration build environment, so all of your stuff will be on the web, and you can edit stuff on the web and have it run up there instead of on your local machine.
That is fantastic.
So if you do an update on the sample IG, there's now a text file sitting in a folder called class notes, showing you that you can put other stuff in your implementation guide folder that the IG publisher will totally ignore. And that will give you all of the steps that you need in order to be able to just run the IG publisher online and see notifications of whether your build was successful, and go look at the logs and go look at the build content if it actually worked, and look at the QA and all of that stuff. So go look there. If you have problems, then find me and I will help you. But I tested it and it actually works. So
That's fantastic, actually. Another example of a complex extension, this is from US core. So you'll see that, for race and ethnicity, the URL is defining the definition, and then they have the top level OMB category to capture the ethnicity, and then a detailed ethnicity code that you can capture as well as a text. So again, this is a complex extension that is defined. If you want to look at how it looks in XML, just click on that. Again, it's a structured definition, And if you go down, you will see how exactly it's defined here. Right here in the snapshot and then the differential. You can go in and look at the XML representation if you want to see how it is defined in XML. So those are extensions. Now we can go to the next part, which is adding an extension in the profile. I know all of you did the usage context spreadsheet. If you want, you can try this as homework maybe later on in the evening. Add the extension because we have not done the extension yet. Maybe once you define the extension successfully, you can add it to the profile, try it out, and maybe tomorrow morning we can start there and see if anybody has any issues with it. Okay. The next topic is capability statements. So are we ready to move on to capabilities? Okay. Capability statements essentially is probably one of the most important aspects of defining an IG. It's basically defining a set of capabilities, behaviors, and other aspects for implementers of all the FHIR clients or FHIR servers. There are many uses for this. One of the uses is essentially to find out what kind of requirements does a server or a client need to implement. You can use it for testing, various kinds of things, automated testing, conformance testing, and so on. You can also specify the specific conformance strength, whether it's a shall, should, or may, for all the different aspects of the profiles, operations, search parameters, and so on and so forth. So in other words, this is basically capturing all of the functional requirements that every implementer needs to do when they're following the particular actor or a system from the IG. And it's very important to kind of read the capability statement. So I'm going to just walk through an example here to kind of give you an overview of the kinds of things that are covered. And then we'll see if we want to create one, a sample one. So let me bring up a capability statement here. Okay, and then so here is a capability statement in kind of rendered form. This is for an actor called STC Form Manager. So what you kind of can expect to do in a capability statement is, you can have some generic information at the top, and then one of the first important things is the version of the FHIR specification that this is going to be dependent on, the formats that you want to support as a server or as a client, XML, JSON. Most capability statements will at least have one of them required, typically JSON, and then some of them have XML also required. Then you get into this REST portion, the RESTful behavior portion, where you're going to outline all of the different resources or profiles that are required to be supported in this IG, are required to be used by implementers of this IG, and then the specific operations that you can perform on those profiles. So for example, on questionnaire resource, using this particular profile, you should be able to read, version read, basically get and get with a version, history, create, update. Create is the post, update is the put, and then delete. The resource history itself is not there. Instance history is supported. So similarly, you have a list of all the profiles and the operations that need to be supported. You can identify the operations that this particular implementation guide or capability statement for an actor depends on. And then you'll have, for each one of the resources that is out here, you're going to define the type of specific search parameters that need to be supported. So in this case, for the questionnaire resource, you need to be able to support the code, context, date, and so on and so forth. And that happens for every single resource that you want. In addition to this, for people who are familiar with Smart on FHIR, all of the OAuth 2 URLs are typically specified in the capability statement also. And that's like the very first piece of information that a client would retrieve to understand what version of the server, what version of the FHIR spec is the server supporting, so that you can figure out how to communicate. So it's very important to kind of outline the capability statement and implement it in the FHIR server as server implementers. So this entire capability statement has a JSON and an XML format. I will bring up the XML format and kind of walk you through some of the same information.
How do you know what content goes in that capability statement?
So it is another resource. Capability statement is also a resource. So you can follow the structure of the capability statement resource. So if I go into the HL7 dot org slash is I'm assuming that is the question, maybe not.
Just like, for example, I tried to look at the capability statement that's on the CDEX profile
Okay.
and say to myself, is this the right content that should be there? I didn't know how to answer that question. How do you know what's the right content that should be in a capability statement?
So maybe let's see if we can unpack it. One is the capability statement structure conforming to this resource structure. That we can probably verify by comparing the XML with the resource structure, right? Now the next question is, am I defining all the operations that are necessary for this server to be implemented properly and for this client to be used properly? So that depends on the use case and the scenario, and whether, you know, in the implementation guide somewhere that has been captured or not. So for example, let's see, let me bring up another implementation guide here that might.
Maybe the easiest way to look at it is you're really defining the use case for that actor. So whatever needs to be implemented to make that actor work on the sender side or receiver side, depending on how you're defining it, you need to put that in. So it's important that it's in the capability statement resource so that when the implementer or the server or who's ever looking at the capability statement knows exactly what they are and are not only required to do, but able to do. So it defines the capabilities of that actor and the constraints on that actor. So what you can and cannot search for, what operations you can and cannot use. So in order for a system to say, okay, I want to use that actor, I know I can, only use these specific operations, these specific resources. So anything that's going to make it so that when somebody's looking at your IG, or somebody who's implemented the IG, what needs to be in there is you need to be able to do X. That could be simple as I support this one resource, and you can fetch it.
Yeah. So in this case, I brought up another IG here, patient-reported outcomes. So kind of defined an abstract model with actors and what the actors need to do. So from that, we derived the capability statements to say, for example, a repository needs to publish questionnaires. So if somebody needs to publish, they need to be able to create a questionnaire and put it in the repository. So a post operation is required, maybe an update to put, and then you should be able to publish it, meaning somebody else is going to retrieve it, like this other actor. So you should be able to support GET or a read operation.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that.
I guess, in an IHE profile, it's really easy to figure out how this works because there's clearly spots where your actors are named. And then you get to another area of they call them profiles instead of IGs, but the IG, where you then, for each of those named actors, you would expect to have the functional
That's right.
capabilities laid out, right? So we're going to expect to have a capability statement for each of your named actors.
That's correct.
But the IGs are so wide open right now in the way that they're written that I can't even put my finger on exactly where will I find the named actors for
Just in
this
all the
IG.
ones that I have done, there is like this table of contents on the capability statements tab for each actor. What are the specific requirements?
But where did you find your named
in the overview tab.
Yeah.
So-
The problem is that it's still wild and woolly out there.
So, so we are on a path. The initial path was IGs was it'd be cool if we had some tools that could actually publish, and we spent a few years iterating through that process. We are now at the it'd be cool if IGs could actually look the same and have the same look and feel, and we are early in the stages of that. There is absolutely a phase that we're going to go through where it'd be nice if our table of contents were consistent and we actually use similar language and we put the same kinds of stuff in the same place. That is not something that necessarily has to wait for years from now, but it is not something that we have really worked on too much yet, because getting the table of contents consistent when some IGs didn't even have a table of contents was putting the cart before the horse. So we absolutely need to have some discussion about, first of all, how much standardization is reasonable, because there are IGs that absolutely don't have capability statements and don't need them, because they're just defining, here's a bunch of data types that are available for use, and there's no notion of capability statements. So we need to figure out, are there certain types and certain standard table contents for each type, or do we have just one type and have a whole bunch of optionality within it? There's a bunch of discussion that still needs to happen in that space, but it is a known need to drive more consistency there. And right now, we don't have consistency, and in some cases, we don't really have even a good sense of what best practice is, other than it's probably not exactly what we got right now.
So one more thing to add to what Lloyd just said. Tomorrow, I think in the afternoon, we have a session on IG organization and structure. As part of that, we are going to cover some of the actors, defining the actors and capabilities first, and then defining the capability statements, but not the other way around. So we will talk more about it.
Given that the concepts of what you would have change with the IG, is there a point at where if you develop something now, is there a point where it's going to become obsolete and you're going to have to redo it because the rules changed?
Yes.
It's just whether that's in minutes, days, or months.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you have to do it, and we have to catch up. Okay, so in the capability statements,
Sorry.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
One question from previous discussion, not this one. Do we have Swagger already in the template? So Swagger generation, is it there yet? Okay, and the other question is the...
The answer to that was no.
No, okay, thank you. Sorry. Swagger generation. It's tools for geeks that can use whatever it is in a way that they can experiment.
Pull requests are possible.
Sorry?
Pull requests are possible.
Okay.
Swagger will be generated anyway, but template's got nothing to do with that.
Well, the template will let you discover it.
Yeah, the template
Okay.
might let you discover it, but Swagger doesn't work, which is a deeper product. Well,
Okay, I'm gonna cut this off because it's not part of what we're here for.
The other thing is, so the capability statement says what the system can do. It can also say what the system does. As a developer, what's the way? So if I give a capability statement to a developer, what does it do with that?
The IG, you're specifying what is the intention. You're specifying what are the requirements for the implementers. An actual server implementation should specify what's actually implemented on the server, not be ambiguous about it.
So the question is, do they have it by hand, or is there a way that they can take that as a package and just deploy?
It is a machine processable resource that can be extracted and processed to understand what is supported and what is not.
So I think the question is, if I've written a server that has implemented 5 implementation guides, is there automated tools that can take the capability statements for the servers of those 5 implementation guides and magically create the one implementation or a capability statement.
We're close to having some tools for that.
So not yet.
This relates to my tutorial on Friday.
Okay, Friday. Look for it. So just a couple of quick points. So in the capability statement, there is the textual part and the narrative part, which kind of renders very well, as you saw in the HTML file. But the more important one is the actual machine processable stuff here that clients will be using to understand. And that comes in this div called, not div, this portion with the REST tag. And inside this, you're going to specify whether you're a client or a server. You'll have resources, the specific resources, the profiles that you're going to support, the interactions or the operations that you're going to support, including whether the requirement is a shell, should, or a may. Similarly, you'll have search parameters, like search params here. Again, shell, should, or may. So this is the actual machine processable stuff that should be defined in the IG, and also in the implementation, this is what should be generated so that clients can look at it and figure out what needs to be done. Okay, that's an example of a capability statement. Let's see. We did this example walkthrough. If you want to define one, you could. Do we have an example, Lloyd, or for a capability statement that we could pull from, or we can?
Not in sample, no.
Okay.
I guess I could make one.
Okay. Do we want to try it?
No, let's skip on to the next topic.
So since we're already at 5, maybe we'll just walk through the next few slides, wrap up the content, and then people who want to do it, we can just hang around and do it.
Yeah, we're here for you if you want to try some of this stuff out. Once we're done through the slides, we'd be happy to help you out with that.
Okay, so let's see. Should I skip code system and value set? You're going to cover them tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Skip over that. Let's go into like Markdown and such.
Okay, so let's see. We have a whole session tomorrow on terminology where David is going to cover code systems and value sets in more depth. So we'll just skip these slides and kind of do this tomorrow. So essentially, there are examples in the STC project that you can look at for this. You can look at these slides and try to do it yourself.
Skipping means you don't go through each one.
Yeah. So tomorrow we can take care of going through in more detail. The next one is narratives. Narratives are quite simple actually. You can you can have narrative part for any profile or extension operation in Markdown format or HTML format, XHTML format. So the way to create narratives is they go into the page content folder, like I said. In there, you would normally see, let me show you. So for every profile, for example, let's look at questionnaire here. So you have a questionnaire profile. There would be a questionnaire intro.xml and a questionnaire notes.xml. So whenever you go to the profile page, everything that you want to be rendered on top of the profile, actual profile, the differential view, you want to put in the intro.xml. This is nothing but a HTML file that you can edit, XHTML file that you can edit. Similarly, the notes is everything after the profile. So typically what happens is, I'll open up one of these things and show you. In the intro section, you kind of describe what this profile is for, and so on and so forth. It gives you some general guidance about the profile itself. So after this, you'll see the profile in the rendered view, and I'll show you an example, which is the actual profile and the differential view. And then you'll see the notes after that. Typically, this includes examples or considerations on how to use it, and so on and so forth, open issues, and so on. So an example of this would be like if you go to the artifact index and you'll click on this profile, STC questionnaire profile, you'll see that in the top there is the scope and usage, which comes from the intro XHTML file, then this part of the profile comes from the actual XML that you created or the spreadsheet that you edited. And then after the profile itself, the language from here on down is the notes. So US Core has done a good job of doing a lot of examples. So for example, let me show you how the US Core does it. In US Core, if you go to the profiles, let's say patient profile. So in the introduction, you'll see all of this information that is very useful for people to read, all the way up to the actual profile. And then this comes from the spreadsheet, that whole thing. And then the quick start and everything comes from the notes. So this gives you an idea of what kind of things to include. Like for example, they give you mandatory search parameters, some examples of this, and so on and so forth. So typically you would use those two files, the intro.xml and the notes.xml for each profile or for each operation definition, and define this, contextual information and then usage information. Go ahead.
To understand, just to reiterate, 'cause it's late. Intro comes before
Yeah.
the spreadsheet, and then notes is what comes after
yeah.
the profile
That's right.
spreadsheet type thing.
So typically intro gives you all the context and everything, then the profile, and then the notes. Typically people use examples, considerations, other types of things that people would like to know. Go ahead.
That's behavior for the spreadsheets only, or can we?
It's for everything. You can have.
So whenever you have an intro file, it will always be displayed before,
Yeah.
and then, I'm sorry, if you don't have a spreadsheet, what's the file that you put there in the middle?
No, the spreadsheet doesn't have anything.
I'm sorry, it could be structure definition.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
could be,
the
XML file.
The XML structure definition file can have that. It will then, the IG publisher that will then pull in the intro and, no?
No, in the spreadsheet, the metadata tab has it. Is that?
Typically what you do, sorry. Typically what you do, cool. My build just blew up. I have examples that are committed in the sample IG. They're currently wrong. I'm debugging why. But you typically put them in as pages. So it's a file name convention, and that in turn drives what the content automatically gets picked up is. So you can have either a markdown file or an XML file with the same name as your resource, and it works for extensions, it works for example instances, it works for whatever it is that you're doing.
I think that's exactly what we said, right? For questionnaire SDC profile spreadsheet that we have here, right? So in the input page content, you would have the SDC questionnaire intro.xml and the notes.xml, and those are mentioned in the file itself, right? Go ahead. Well, the names are not the same, so if the names are not the same, then you have to mention it somewhere, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, I wouldn't mention them in the spreadsheet at all.
In this case, the example that we have in STC, because the names are not the same, we're mentioning it. Go ahead.
So if I understand well, the naming convention dictates whether things will be separate pages or they will be agglomerated into one page. If I have an intro and the content and the notes section,
the intro will be on top, the notes will be on the bottom, as long as the file name.
and that's the file naming convention. Okay, thanks.
If you don't have the same file names, is there some way to link it in the file then, or okay, can you?
I'm sorry that I'm cutting off questions, but we've actually run, we still have almost an hour of content, and we're running really, really long, and I don't want to keep the poor people here forever.
In the spreadsheet one, you can mention the names. Just a quick answer. But I don't know about the XML one yet. So, okay. Okay, let's see if we can run through fast. So that's, you can edit the intro.xml and notes.xml to edit the content. If you want to create other pages, definitely you can create those as XHTML files and put it in and link it in the ig.xml resource. So again, there is an exercise for people to play around with to do that. Images. So there is a folder for images like we described in the folder structure initially. So you can drop your image as a JPEG or a PNG file and then link it in the XHTML file, and then they would show up appropriately.
Yeah, if you're using XHTML, just treat it like you would any HTML. You can link it by name. It's just an image source.
And next is examples. So for examples, again, there is a folder where you can put the examples in, and the examples, typically you would create it using XML, an actual example of each of the different profiles that you have created, at least, at a minimum. For every profile you have created, you should at least have an example showing how it is done. So there are some examples here for you to review, how to actually create an example, put it in the folder, and then look at it. So in like the project that we were looking at, in the examples folder, you'll see that there is a whole bunch of examples that have been created which conform to the resources. Go ahead.
So we typically create the examples in XML because you can embed comments throughout the XML, and we encourage you to do that because it gives guidance to implementers in terms of what to do. We generate from that JSON and RDF if you don't have them turned off. And in fact, you can author examples in XML and have an IG that only publishes JSON, or vice versa if you wanted to. But we typically author using XML because it gives us that ability to embed comments, whereas JSON doesn't.
Yeah, I would recommend always examples using XML. That's the most common one that we have seen in most of the IGs. So we have an example exercise. Again, same thing. Copy an existing example, modify it, publish it, look at it, and see how it looks. The last part that I think I have to cover is the validator. So there is a specific thing called as a FHIR validator, and there is a wiki page that gives you complete detail of what the validator is for. So every example that you're creating, you can validate using this validator. I didn't know a lot about this until today morning when my colleagues coached me on it. So it's pretty neat. There's a lot of powerful things as part of this that can be done. So I would recommend going through this wiki page and using an example and validating that example using the validator. That we have. And then you can, this is the other way that you can use the validation pack. You can use it within your client and server to validate every resource that is being sent or received and making sure that they conform to the specific profiles that you're working with. Go ahead.
So if you go back a slide before, the validator, every resource is validated as part of publishing the IG. Have we looked at QA.html yet?
Not yet. There is a session for that.
Okay. So everything that automatically is validated, and you have to get that right. What you get by binding the XML file to schemas is that you have an editor, if you use a schema-aware editor, that will tell you if you have schema problems while you're editing the file. It doesn't make any difference to anything else. That's what you get with the XML file there. Right, that's clear. It's only useful for, and in fact, the IG publisher will strip the schema declaration when it publishes. All right, the next slide. We've moved on from the zip file. So now when you publish, we actually produce an NPM package as part of the publication run, and everything hangs off the NPM package. All the tools use the NPM package, and so actually the publication is a dual publication. You published a bunch of HTML for humans and an NPM package for any machine that wants to do anything with the IG, and then thereafter there's a whole lot of downstream processes for dealing with the NPM package that the toolsmiths look after.
Thanks, Graham. I think that's it for me, I think. So here you go, right? The build errors. The very first thing you need to fix is the build errors, right? So you have two build errors here. The link.
Yeah, because that's not big. This file is output by the IG publisher, and what it does is even if if the IG publisher goes through and everything builds correctly, meaning there was no structural problem, there can be logical errors, there can be all kinds of exciting things that are still wrong, all of which needs to be fixed.
And you're not allowed to go to ballot if you have any errors, unless they have been approved by,
Yes, please.
unless they've been
This
approved
is
by
not
grammar.
me.
Now, yes, because there will be times where they're not your fault. It's like having logical models don't have to have schematrons. I know. Oh, Lloyd, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to walk through these a little bit. So this is one of those fun learning by doing experiences where the first time you look at this, you go, what on earth is going on? This is a hyperlink issue, first of all. It's saying, hey, I have a link here in questionnaire response definitions, and I've got an element called ordinal value. It's trying to hyperlink to this path in definitions and can't find it. And here's all of the things that do exist. And so you go, okay, but I didn't put anything in my implementation guide that does this. This is stuff that the publisher just does by its own magic, because this link that is having the problem is from the graphical definition when I go look at it, and it's pointing to another piece of generated text, so this is not my fault. And that is the correct answer. This is probably not your fault. Yeah. Yeah. What's
Slicing errors can also look like this.
Yeah, this is exactly what's going on, is that you've got a situation where the differential and the way that the differential is representing things is not the same way as the snapshot is representing things. And sometimes that's because you messed up on the definition of the differential, and you may actually see errors down below in the structure definitions that say, hey, your differential is messed up. So the first thing that I typically do after realizing, okay, this seems to be a linking error in generated code as opposed to something that I'm in control of, is go down and take a look at the structure definitions and see if it's yelling at me about them there. And in this case, if I scroll down to the structure definition for my way down into my structure definition profile, it's not yelling at me about those particular things. In this case, it is my opinion. I think I raised it with Graham once, and it's on his list, probably way down by now, because it was a long time ago. It might not be on his list anymore, that this is actually a problem with the snapshot generator. I haven't been bugging him about it because I actually know how to debug the snapshot generator, and when I actually get to the point where I care enough about this error, because I'm actually thinking about really publishing, then I'll probably go debug it myself, as opposed to making Graham do it. But for other people who don't want to get into debugging the snapshot generator, which should be all of you, the answer is go bug Graham or bug me, because that's evil code.
Chat.fire.org.
Indeed. So it's totally okay to ask, say, I've got an issue that looks like this. I have no idea what this means. Help. And there are quite a few people who have seen lots of issues that look like this that can provide some of the high level, try this, try this, try this, and that'll help half of you. And once you get to the end of that, okay, post a GForge item for Graham, which is the second possibility, because it is actually a tooling problem, because like I said, snapshot generation is evil, evil, evil code, and there are edge cases that people insist on coming up with that occasionally don't do what we want them to do. So this is one of those things that gives you a huge, huge list, because it's saying, I couldn't find the target to point to. Here's all of the possibilities that it could have been.
Which is the least helpful thing you can imagine.
Well, sometimes it's actually useful because you can see. So if I go in and look for questionnaire item response value,
That looks like it's an extension definition error.
why is my search? So the issue is here. I'm looking for a value coding, and what it's actually got is a value X value coding, and so the question is this something that should be changed in the differential? And when I last looked, this was actually not working. It looks like it's now working, so I could actually put in value X value coding in the differential, and this would be okay.
So I say a little bit about this. This is kind of a pretty deep rabbit hole. The first thing you get in this list is a list of broken links. The broken links will either come out of content that the publisher generated, or it'll come out of content that you wrote. If it comes out of content the generator generated, which this particular one is, what you have left is the weird corner cases very far away from the mainstream. Lloyd is good at producing those, and so that's what we have
produces those
here. And you'll get, this is incomprehensible to you because it's not your problem. So when you look at this, that's my problem. But most of the entries in here, broken links, are your broken links, usually. Like you wrote some reference to something in your narrative, and it turns out that you were misanticipating what you were pointing to because the IG publisher checks every link.
And it's case sensitive.
Those are much more obvious when you see this list. And you see that list of possible targets is actually interesting because it's the possible things that you could be referencing to when you're meant to reference whatever it is you're meant to reference. Well, you just have to, in your implementation guide, write a link that's broken and then produce it. I don't believe that the sample ones have standard broken links. But if you want to see the broken links, go to... how do I get something out there? Well, there's a... Do you get the list of IG builds? Yeah, that's exactly what I want. Now search for candidate. And then click on the QA link over on the right from there. And now go to build errors. So you'll see, this is an implementation guide that I'm halfway through writing the narrative for. And you'll see there's heaps and heaps of just broken links because I haven't got the narrative in place that I've referred to that I'm going to have. Right? So these are just pages that don't exist because I'm only halfway through writing this thing. But the other thing I wanted to do, Lloyd, click on the left, the link on the left here. All right? It actually tries to find, it failed this time because of tabs, but it tries to find the place where the actual error is. Oh no, it didn't because it's at the top of the page there, the one you clicked on. It's in the narrative. It's in the menu bar. There's a... but that link will try and show you where it is, but your HTML might be too folded for you to actually... It can't show you what's in the menu that's broken, right? That one there. But it will try and take you to that link, and on a big page with lots of narrative, that can be really, really useful.
A really good way to get lots of errors in your IG is to include links in your menu that are broken, because they
Yeah.
will show up on every single page.
Yeah, that's how you get hundreds and hundreds of broken links. Yes, that's right. I've got like 3 problems that are 530 broken links. That's fine. So that's the kind of thing that you'll see there. If you go back to the QA page, what else? Well, it's kind of pretty awesome when you come to this and you've got 72 hours to ballot opening, and you've got 100 hours of hunting things down in here.
Graham has changed the IG publisher and now breaks your bill.
No, well, that's happening less now. So I think
has
it's.
enhanced the validation capabilities that determine that there's a whole lot of
Yeah.
things that you used to think were right that aren't.
I think it's a
and
good
never were.
thing to stay on top of the broken links. But it's, at the end of the day, I typically say I'm not going to publish an implementation guide that has broken links. Right? I mean, sometimes we just go, it would take me 3 or 4 days to trace some of those, like those weird edge cases, ones that are left over. They are seriously large amounts of work because it's a long story. And I had thought that I cracked it last week when I spent 2 days on that particular issue. But most of them, we look at them and go, no, if you wrote a link that you think should work, then it should work for balloters. We're not going to waste their time with that. But every so often, FMG will be convinced that we should let some errors go through. But generally, our response is, you need to get this stuff right.
I like the name, IPA. Spine.
So you will end up coming to this page a lot.
Yeah,
You won't necessarily like this page a lot, but
for those of you looking at this particular implementation guide, is just to come on the implementation guide itself. I was asked to write this by Apple. It's an internationalized version of Argonaut. Okay, so, but we'll get back to that. It'll appear some other time.
all right. I'm just checking to see if I've got anything else interesting here to show.
I gotta say, I do enjoy doing this. I know that's so weird, but it is, as long as
It's-
I'm not right up to, Sunday night for a deadline, it's actually quite fun finding the errors and fixing them, especially if you fix a whole bunch. And
Yeah.
it may disappear. I don't know, it's like a game.
Yeah. Seeing that QA come in clean is possibly the best feeling you can have as an IG publisher or
Yeah.
author.
Because you made them go away.
And there were hundreds.
Yeah. And some of these that you're seeing here at the top of the implementation guide are because we have stuff now that the tooling is doing that we haven't told the tooling is okay to be doing yet. And so it's yelling at us about it. So this is stuff that we need to fix.
Is there a good way to find things that have already been reported? Is in a search cycle?
Yes. So as IG authors, as soon as you get commit access to an HL7 Git repository, one of the things you need to promise to do is to subscribe to a committers/announce. That's where we will tell you things that, by the way, there's a new set of rules that you need to adhere to. And we will tell you about other really key important things. You have to sign up for that. There is another stream that is much more verbose called the General Committers stream, which is where we talk about, hey, I've encountered this weird error, what do I do? And so if you expect to be doing a lot of this stuff and want to keep up in terms of what's going on and what are other people experiencing, and oh, I know why my build is not working nicely, it's because the terminology server is down and Graham won't be up awake for another 2 hours and Lloyd doesn't know how to log in. you can see that kind of thing discussed on the committer stream. We do not spam the announced list with that kind of stuff, but that's a good way to monitor and figure out what's going on. And it's also the place to raise the questions of, if you are the first one to notice that, hey, my build has hung and nothing's going on and it's been 30 minutes and it normally takes me 5, that's a place to raise the question and have somebody come take a look at it.
The committer stream is very busy, especially the week before ballot submission. So be ready if you want to keep up.
Yeah.
And ballot is coming. Searching is a lovely
absolutely
thing.
useful. You don't have to read everything. It might be something that you only go bother to look at when something weird happens. And so I have weirdness. Let's go look for this error message and see if anybody else has reported it or if there's any other traffic related to this problem. And if not, then I'll ask the question. But yeah, searching before you ask the question is always appreciated.
But don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't spend
No.
6 hours on something and then.
Yeah.
Can you just go up the very top? At the very top of the page, there's some publication checks. Melva's going to talk about those tomorrow, right? Tomorrow? So Melva will talk about the publication checks. Now, can you go down to one of your actual resources, the using FHT? Oh, yeah. HL7.org/FHIR/ does not resolve. It should be just /FHIR. So the validation is very finicky. I don't know why the URL doesn't resolve the next one.
Because it's not a .html.
No, it's a canonical URL, so it should work. It should be fine. So I don't know, that one, you go and check that the canonical URL does actually resolve in your guide. And if it does, then you contact us and say, well, that's weird.
Oh, because there is no questionnaire folder.
So you haven't actually defined the questionnaire.
Oh, I've defined the questionnaire, but there is no file with this name.
There's a what, sorry?
In the SDC folder, there is a file that corresponds to this. There is no subfolder for questionnaire.
It doesn't matter. It's a canonical URL. It resolves.
Okay.
So if you have the canonical URL, then it should work. That's my problem, how that works. So that's kind of odd, that one. The next one you'll see lots.
Yes.
Which Lloyd particularly likes generating these ones. The name is supposed to be a computer processable name. Lloyd clearly doesn't go for that.
Well,
because that's the rules for names
it's
that
supposed to
FHIR.
be a class name, essentially. It should
Yeah.
look like a Java class name.
Yeah,
and
and
so
people-
what's happening here is because I don't have one defined at all, it goes and grabs the human description name, which is not so computer friendly. So we didn't actually used to have a way of specifying these in spreadsheets, which is why the complaints all over the place. We now do.
Okay, now we
just haven't got to the point where I want to publish.
Okay, now we're getting to ones that really matter. These LOINC list value sets are all technically wrong.
Yes.
This is where you'll spend a lot of time trying to figure out what you should be saying in terminology-wise. There's actually a LOINC syntax for a LOINC list, LOINC value set, but I'm not using it here. So it's in the terminology space, so we're very insistent on getting it lined up, but there's some things that the terminology subsystem doesn't know how to support. For instance, US core, there's 5 or 6 of these left over where US core uses CPT in examples. But the infrastructure isn't licensed to use CPT, so we can't validate it. So and I think HAI has something similar. So we just say, okay, whatever. We're working on the licensing, but in the meantime, check it manually. And then when you go to publish, you tell me that you've checked the codes manually. And then I'll say, okay. But then here's one that generates a lot of hassles is displays. people using displays which are what you wish the display was, but it's not what the terminology says the display is. So most of these errors in the end, a lot of them relate to terminology stuff, and you'll spend a lot of time getting your ducks in a row with terminology.
They do.
That doesn't mean you like the answer. I get in arguments with with people about the answer. And also, not all of the subsystems are language aware for those people not working in English, which is another piece of fun for me. Right. All right. It's really enough. But
Yeah, that is. I think these are all sort of the same sort of stuff. So,
The short answer is, because we're now over time, is that you're going to run into lots of different kinds of errors, lots of warnings, all of which are solvable, except for the few that aren't, because they're solvable by Graham. And the big thing is that go back to your structure definitions, go back to your spreadsheets, go back and look at them. A lot of them are simple errors. You know, it's a capitalization error, it's a typo. A lot of these things are very simple to fix. Some of them are going to take, you know, a fair amount of work. Terminology problems with Loink, terminology problems with, you know, any of the majors, licensing issues. Some of them are big deals that will take you quite a bit of time to fix, but they are fixable. Don't, just because the first time you run it, you get 472 errors, 375 warnings, and 12 informational messages doesn't mean you've screwed up. It just means that the IG publisher is really picky. And you'll fix a lot of them quickly, and like I said, the best feeling in the world is watching the, you know, a clean QA come out.
yeah, and there will be, I mean, when you're watching the committer notification stream, these are not bad, seeing these counts. But the key thing is, I have seen people who, after having seen the IG publisher crash a few times, it gets to the end and says build successful, and they think they're done. No, you haven't started yet. You really have to pay attention to the error accounts that are a few messages above the build successful to tell you whether or not you are in fact done.
That reminds me actually too, sometimes the build doesn't, or sometimes the IG publisher crashes, and you also then you have to just, you know, figure out what's actually wrong, why it's crashing.
Yeah.
And quite often, mostly it's because of something you've done in your structure.
When the IG publisher crashes, that's technically always Graham and Maya and whoever else maintains the IG publisher's fault, because it shouldn't ever crash, in theory.
In theory.
We should have input protections that provide nice descriptive error messages saying you did something wonky in your XML here that you shouldn't have done. But the reality is the amount of time it would take for us to create code that checks all of the inputs and all of the creative ways that people can screw them up is time we don't have. So when something happens on a repeated basis, we'll generally add a check to make it give you a nicer message. But when you do something really weird and esoteric that we don't expect is ever going to happen again because it was just a fluke, then we'll tell you what the problem was and how to fix it, but we won't necessarily go in and change the code so that it doesn't blow up the next time.
Two quick questions. You said you can't have any errors in your IG. I know some are warnings. You also need to get rid of all the warnings for publication?
So warning means this is a potential error. The computer can't figure out whether it's an error or not. So as an example, the display name not matching is a warning because it's possible that there is some supplementary language file that our terminology server isn't aware of that means that that's a valid string. We can't tell for sure, so if you can go in and say, yeah, looked it up here, it's valid, there is a mechanism to suppress warnings in your implementation guide. One of the files that you'll see in the sample IG that you've downloaded is a suppressed warnings file. And so warnings and information messages you can actually suppress. Information messages are just general noise. It says, by the way, I looked at this spreadsheet and I extracted these 7 profiles out of it, and that's only useful to you if you were expecting it to extract 8, and you're realizing, oh, that's why it's not showing up, because I forgot to put it on the metadata page or whatever. So, but you can, once you see those and go, yeah, that's fine, you can put those on the ignore list so that it doesn't clutter up your list. The warnings, you suppress them after you've confirmed that, yes, this is indeed what I want. So sometimes you have a reference and you haven't included a display, and our quality criteria say you should be including a display, but maybe this is a situation where a display doesn't make sense, or a display is in fact prohibited, and so you can say, yes, it's good practice, but here I don't have it and it's intentional, and so you put in some comments explaining why and add it to your suppressed list, and that's okay. In theory, other people will take a look at what you've suppressed and evaluate whether what you did was reasonable or not. Bandwidth doesn't necessarily let us do that, but it can happen at some point. So don't suppress things on the grounds that, well, I'll just suppress everything and then I can publish. That's not kosher. And if you start doing that, then you might find you don't have publishing privileges anymore.
Do those suppressed warnings come in a different file, or are they in the QA.html?
So what happens is there's a suppressed warnings file that you copy the warnings that you want to suppress into, and then at the very bottom, I went and lost where I was. I should have opened this in a different tab. Way down at the bottom here is my list of things that I have suppressed. So you can actually see what I've suppressed, if you care, but it's not going to bother you about it in your counts. It's not going to bother you about it in this table of green happy things and red not so happy things. It's just, these are warnings that I've already dealt with, and here's my comments that explain why this isn't a problem. You put them in the file. So there is
You put the actual text of the warning in the I think it's called ignore warnings.txt or suppressed warnings.
One of the two, I forget.
Yeah.
But it's if you look in your sample IG in your input folder, it'll be one of the files sitting. Should be the only file sitting there beside your implementation guide itself. Ignore warnings.
Yeah, and you literally just copy the text in, or most of the text. You could actually put parts of it. I don't know.
Yeah, there's two different ways you can do it. You can do it in a context-specific way, or you can do it, I don't care about any of these warnings. There will be some documentation we will share that will give you guidance in terms of how to use that, but we're not going to talk about it right now. There's actually, there's a QA.html file. There's actually also a QA.txt file that doesn't have, what am I looking at? That's my, so if I get rid of that, you might find that it works better to do your copying from here because it doesn't have any markup or any other funky stuff here. It's also not as pretty. But yeah, if you basically just take this, well, this one is long, so this is one error. And the next one starts down here. If I was looking at this in an editor that did not have wrapping turned on, then it would be more obvious. So I could, if I wanted to, just take this and say I'm suppressing that, which would suppress all of them. But that would be a bad thing for me to do, because I should actually fix all of these. And I will, when I have time, because I'm not publishing it.
Okay. Questions?
Mine's easy. You mentioned two chat.fire.org streams.
Streams.
One well, you mentioned 3 total.
Yeah.
One was notification, one was
Announce.
and the other was general
Yes.
committers.
So there's committers, which is the general noisy free discussion. There's committers announce, which is, yeah, we better make sure that everybody knows about this, including the people who aren't paying attention. So we put that on the announce stream, which everybody is required to subscribe to. If we send out an announcement and say, please respond to this within the next 2 weeks, and you don't, you might find all of your commit privileges revoked. We did that once. And then we have the committer's notifications, which basically every time there is a new build of any implementation guide, or of the publisher, or of the validator, we fire a notification there so that you can see what's happening, both with your own stuff and with other people's stuff. And it's totally fine to ignore everybody else's stuff and just pay attention to your own. But if you commit something, it is good practice to monitor that and make sure that it comes back with a thumbs up, because on occasion it builds fine on your machine and you commit it and you push it and you forgot to commit one of the new files, and therefore it doesn't run nicely up on the server, and the IG is now broken and nobody can go link to it anymore. For IGs, it's not as big a problem. If you do that with the core build, then you make people very unhappy. If you do it with just your IG, then it's not as much of a problem because not as many people care.
Besides this, the ignore warnings, is there any way that we can classify and say, for example, for IHE or for any institution, say these kind of errors are acceptable, but if you want to go public comment or if you want to go to whatever, these ones are not? Any stratification that you can do there?
Yeah, I mean, could you add a layer in the IHE publishing machinery to filter down the list before it gets reported? We could possibly figure out a way to do that. Our general premise is if it's a problem, then it's a problem that should be fixed before you publish. I mean, if you're sending something out as an official publication or you're sending something out to ballot, in both of those cases, they should generally be clear. There is a governance process that makes a final determination. So if you come and say, I fixed everything except for these 5, and these 2 I don't think should be a problem because of X, and these 3 are a problem because of tooling, or these 10,000 I simply cannot fix and I don't think it matters for the purposes of this for comment review because I'm only looking at these pieces and that's not related, you can always make that argument. But it's not sort of a general rule kind of thing.
I think it would be bad to add a filter. It's a policy decision what to publish. I thought I'd just mention to everyone that we publish QA.html for every guide that we've ever published. So you can actually go and look at it when you're balloting. When I'm talking about balloting on Friday, I'm going to recommend that you look at it so you can see where things stand. And it's a valid thing for us to say, no, we will go ahead and publish for ballot or milestone with outstanding QA issues, but then people can go and see what they are and understand what it is that we decided to do. So I would recommend against hiding them, and just be explicit. This is what we decided to do and why. And then there are things that you'll decide to go ahead and publish, irrespective of the machinery thinking they're a QA issue. But at least people know that that's where you were.
Other questions? Have we filled your heads enough for today? Oh, wait. Linda always has one more question.
Let me show you where to find the slides.
The slides are all one deck, including tomorrow's, so you can all have them. They are. They're in the GitHub FHIR documents. Yep. Yeah, if you go to GitHub/FHIR/documents/presentations/2019 FHIR IG tutorial, you will see one which is -all. No.
No, I'm going to walk you through it. All right, so first key thing is github.com. The organization within GitHub is FHIR. There's 2 organizations under GitHub that you will care about. One is HL7, which is where we put standards stuff, and the other is FHIR, where we put FHIR.org stuff, which includes educational material and tooling material and other various wonky stuff. Beneath that, there is a specific project called Documents, which includes a whole bunch of things. The thing that you particularly care about is presentations. And if you go into presentations, you can see pretty much every presentation we've ever given about FHIR. If you want to laugh sometime, go take a look at the ones from 2012 and see when we thought we were going to publish normative. But way down at the bottom, in September, is one on
Yeah,
IG
that's
training.
Yeah, and the FHIR implementation guide training dash all PowerPoint is all the slides you will see today and tomorrow.
And in theory, if we fix something because we realize the slides were broken, we'll actually push updates to these. So a lot of the FHIR educational material is freely available. Obviously, the slides don't give you all of the narrative and stuff that goes with it, but most of them are here, and most of them are licensed under Creative Commons for you to take and use in your own organizations.
Creative Commons attribution for this set, so you have to actually admit that we did it.
Yeah. We ask you to say thank you. And some of our decks actually have built-in thank you slides that say thank you to the 20 people that were involved, and you just add your name to the list and pass it along.
All right, and that wraps it up for today. We hope this was enjoyable half a day. Now we have a full day of it tomorrow.